Tonight, I invite you to journey far beyond the noise of the modern world, into a time when the night was deeper, the stars were brighter, and silence carried stories no voice could fully explain. Before we begin, take a slow breath, and let your mind loosen its grip on the day. The world we're about to step into had no glowing screens, no streetlights, no engines humming in the distance. Nightfall was not just a change in light, it was a shift in the very rhythm of life. For the people of the ancient world, nighttime was both a curtain of mystery and a companion that shaped how they worked, how they rested, even how they dreamed. In this long, gentle exploration, we will drift through different civilizations, from the quiet alleys of ancient Mesopotamia to the soft lamp-lit homes of Greece and Rome. From the deserts of Egypt where night transformed the sky into a sacred temple, to the far corners of the world where people watched the same moon we see now, but with entirely different eyes. We will talk about how ancient people lit their homes, how they moved through streets after sunset, what they feared, what they worshipped, and how they found comfort in a darkness that today would feel overwhelming. This is not a journey rushed by time. It's a slow descent into a forgotten atmosphere, a world where shadows, sounds, and silence shaped every human emotion. If you're ready, settle in, because tonight, we explore how the ancient world lived when the sun disappeared. As the final edge of the sun slipped beneath the horizon, the ancient world exhaled, not in the way our cities do today, with glowing billboards, humming power lines, and a million artificial lights replacing the day, but with a silent, almost sacred pause, a moment that belonged entirely to nature. In the ancient world, sunset was not just the end of daylight, it was the beginning of an entirely different existence, a second life layered over the first. And every culture, every village, every wandering traveler felt this transition deeply. The air cooled, shadows stretched, melting slowly into one another until they became one continuous veil. Voices softened, and from far away, beyond the fields, beyond the city walls, beyond the riverbanks, the world grew still enough that a person could hear the difference in their own breathing. For the people of antiquity, this was the hour of gentle anticipation, an hour not rushed, not feared, but respected, because the boundary between day and night meant more to them than we can easily imagine. During daylight, life was defined by clarity. Faces were visible, paths were certain, work filled the hours, and the sun acted like a watchtower, overseeing everything with sharp, unwavering light. But after sunset, everything softened, edges dissolved, and the world became a place ruled not by sight, but by sound, memory, touch, and imagination. Most ancient people did not wander far after dark, not because every corner was dangerous, but because darkness changed their awareness. It required humility, a willingness to accept that the world was larger and more mysterious than the human eye could grasp. Yet the transition did not bring sudden fear. Instead, it brought ritual. Families, communities, and travelers all had their own ways of greeting the night. In a small Mesopotamian home, for example, someone would move quietly to light the first oil lamp. The flame would flicker, hesitating, as if awakening from its own kind of sleep. Shadows would dance softly across clay walls, creating moving patterns that many found calming rather than frightening. In the Egyptian countryside, farmers returning from the fields often washed their hands in cool water before stepping inside. A simple act of cleansing, symbolizing the end of work and the entry into rest. Sometimes they whispered thanks to the gods for the safe completion of another day. In the rural Greek world, the final embers of cooking fires glowed faintly as families shared their last words before the home fell into gentle quiet. Outside, the hills were wrapped in a soft bluish darkness, and the first stars emerged with delicate caution. In ancient Rome, as the red color of dusk faded, the city's noise slowly changed tone. Merchants closed their stalls, neighbors exchanged final greetings, and distant footsteps echoed differently, as if the stone streets themselves were preparing for rest. Across the ancient world, this universal experience, the falling of night, shaped culture more deeply than we often realize. People didn't think of darkness as an inconvenience. They saw it as an essential half of life. To understand how the ancient world lived at night, we must first understand what night meant to them. And to do that, we have to linger in this moment, this gentle, silent transition, where the last orange traces of sunlight dissolve into blue and then into darkness. Because for ancient people, nightfall was not empty. It was full of stories, full of beliefs, full of unseen presences. It carried both comfort and mystery. As the light faded entirely, the first lamps began to glow inside homes. These small flames were more than sources of light. They were symbols of protection. People believed the flame kept away wandering spirits, bad luck, or unseen dangers of the night. But more than anything, it brought a sense of warmth, a sense of continued life. Into the growing quiet, outside, the world was transforming. Animals that hid during the day now emerged. The faint rustle of nocturnal creatures became part of the night's natural rhythm. Wind moved differently, carrying cooler air and distant, softened sounds. For ancient humans, these noises were not alarming. They were familiar companions, reminders that the night had its own unique heartbeat. Some people took this hour to look up at the sky, and the sight they saw was nothing like what we see today. With no light pollution, no cities shining like islands of electricity, the night sky was overwhelming in its beauty. Stars appeared not as individual specks, but as rivers of light, as if the heavens themselves were glowing with stories waiting to be told. Many ancient civilizations believed the sky was a map of their destiny. A cosmic clock, a divine message board. Standing beneath that sky, a person felt small, but safely so, connected, grounded, aware of the vastness around them. This was the emotional landscape of ancient night, a softness mixed with awe, quiet mixed with meaning. Inside homes, people performed simple nightly routines. A clay jar sealed, a rug shaken, a door bar placed gently across the entrance. These actions were not rushed. They were part of the rhythm of life. Night brought families closer together. In many ancient cultures, storytelling was the primary form of evening entertainment. But unlike today, where stories must be fast, loud, and attention-grabbing, ancient storytelling was slow, almost meditative. A father, mother, or elder would speak softly, the warm lamp light casting gentle shadows, and children would fall asleep slowly as the story continued. Outside, the environment continued its subtle transformation. The last workers or travelers hurried to reach home before full darkness fell. Torches were lit, dogs barked briefly at passers-by, then returned to their resting places. And from distant hills or fields, faint calls echoed. A shepherd gathering animals for the night, or someone guiding the final cart back into the village. There was no sense of hurry, only the natural order of things. When full darkness finally settled, a deep quiet took over. It was not silence. Nature rarely offers true silence, but a calm, steady soundscape, the gentle pulse of distant insects, the whisper of wind through trees, the soft movement of animals, all blending into a kind of nighttime music. For the ancient world, this was the environment in which nightly life began. Night was not the end. It was a beginning, a different kind of existence, shaped by darkness rather than light, by quiet rather than noise. And as we move deeper into this journey, we will explore how different cultures embraced the night, how they traveled after dark, what dangers they feared, what rituals they practiced, how they slept, how they dreamed. But before we reach any of that, we must stay here a little longer, in this twilight hour where the light has gone, but the world has not yet fallen asleep, because this moment, more than any other, reveals how ancient people understood the night, not as emptiness, but as a living presence. A presence that touched every home, every village, every wanderer on the road, and every soul who looked up at the vast, star-filled sky and felt the quiet embrace of a world without artificial light. When night fully settled over the ancient world, life changed in ways that are difficult to imagine today. Without the harsh brightness of artificial lights, darkness had weight, depth, and shape. It moved gently through the streets, filled the corners of every home, and wrapped entire cities in a soft, almost protective silence. People did not fight this darkness. They lived with it, adapted to it, and understood it as a natural part of existence. The first thing anyone would notice in an ancient home at night was the flicker of an oil lamp. The flame was small, delicate, and never fully steady. It bent and swayed with every movement of air, casting shadows that wavered like silent dancers across the walls. These shadows did not startle people. In fact, their gentle motion was soothing. After a long day of harsh sunlight and physical labor, the low warm glow of a lamp brought comfort and calmness. Many lamps were simple clay bowls filled with olive oil, animal fat, or fragrant resin. A small linen or plant fiber wick sat on one edge, slowly drinking the oil as it burned. The smell of a lamp was familiar, slightly earthy, faintly sweet, sometimes mixed with the scent of herbs placed nearby to purify the air. This soft illumination rarely filled a whole room. Instead, it created pockets of light, islands of visibility surrounded by gentle darkness. People gathered within these islands. They sat closer to one another, spoke more quietly, and let the night guide their behavior. Outside the home, the transformation was even more striking. Streets that were busy and noisy during the day became still. Footsteps echoed farther. Conversations sounded different, softer, as though the night absorbed some of their energy. Dogs curled into corners. Stray cats moved with stealth through the alleys. Even the wind seemed to travel more slowly. Only a few sources of light existed outdoors. A torch carried by a traveler, a lantern hung near a tavern, or the dim glow of a shrine candle flickering beside a temple entrance. These small lights looked fragile against the vast darkness surrounding them, but they were enough to guide people who needed to be out after sunset. Most stayed indoors, not out of fear, but because night was understood as a time for rest, reflection, and quiet. In many ancient communities, households gathered around their single lamp much like families today gather around a television or phone screen. The lamp became the center of the evening. It illuminated meals, conversations, and the simple nightly tasks that prepared a home for sleep. People cleaned the final tools of the day, tied storage jars, checked doors, arranged bedding, or folded garments. These were slow tasks, done without rush, their rhythms guided by the gentle flame. Sometimes a mother hummed as she worked. Sometimes an elder told a calm, slow-moving story, the kind meant not to excite but to soothe listeners toward sleep. Children's eyelids often grew heavy before the story even reached its middle. The fire's warmth, the low tone of a familiar voice, and the steady darkness surrounding the lamp created an atmosphere that made rest inevitable. For those who remained awake longer, night had its own kind of serenity. People listened more carefully, to the crackling of the lamp's wick, to insects just outside the window, to the distant softened sounds of animals settling into the fields. Without machines, traffic, or constant human noise, nighttime was a soundscape of subtle natural rhythms even in cities like Rome or Athens. which were busy and chaotic during the day. Nights were surprisingly quiet. The city breathed more slowly. The absence of artificial light and modern noise allowed people to sense the world more clearly. The echo of footsteps, the cooling of stone walls, the whisper of fabric when someone walked past, the far-off bark of a dog, the shifting of the breeze. The night sharpened the senses, but in a calming way. It invited awareness without anxiety. In some places, communal lamps or braziers were maintained through the evening. They emitted a deeper, warmer glow than oil lamps and helped people navigate central areas in a town or courtyard. These fires also served symbolic roles. A burning flame was believed to offer protection against misfortune, against wandering spirits, or simply against the uncertainty of the dark. For many civilizations, flame was a spiritual presence. To let it die carelessly was considered disrespectful. People tended it with mindfulness. Even a simple action like adding a pinch of oil or adjusting a wick carried quiet meaning. Travelers who found themselves on the road after sunset experienced an entirely different world. The darkness beyond city walls was thicker, deeper, almost tangible. Paths were faintly visible under moonlight, but every noise stood out. A rustling animal, the distant splash of water, the soft, rhythmic chirping of night insects. Instead of being frightening, these sounds helped travelers understand where they were. Every culture trained its people to read the night, its sounds, its scents, its winds, as carefully as they read the daylight landscape. The night sky provided even more guidance. In the ancient world, with no light pollution at all, the stars revealed themselves in overwhelming clarity. They were so numerous they formed bright rivers across the sky. Entire constellations were easy to see. Even from inside a city, people learned to navigate by them, pray beneath them, and mark time through their movement. For many, looking up at the night sky was a moment of profound emotional grounding. Inside homes, meanwhile, lamps burned slowly. Families often placed them in corners or near altars. Some kept them close to the sleeping area, though never too close to the bedding. People understood the balance between safety and comfort. As the night deepened, each lamp grew dimmer. The oil inside thinned, the flame lowered. Eventually, it would shrink into a tiny ember that pulsed gently before fading. Darkness reclaimed the room. Even then, people were not afraid. They welcomed the night's embrace. Their eyes adjusted quickly. The outlines of familiar objects remained visible in lunar light. The quiet was complete, soft, deep, and peaceful. When a lamp went out, it signaled the final moment of the day. People lay down on simple mats, woolen blankets, straw-filled bedding, or soft animal skins. Sleep came naturally. There were no screens, no glowing devices, no mental stimulation pulling them awake. The rhythm of the world itself lulled them. Knowing that the land was resting, that animals were resting, that neighbors were resting, made it easier for the body to surrender to rest as well. The ancient night carried a sense of unity. Everyone, rich or poor, farmer or traveler, child or elder, lived under the same darkness, heard the same winds, slept beneath the same stars. In the deepest hours of night, when even the last ember had cooled, the ancient world became quieter than anything we experience today. Cities, villages, and open fields all rested under a vast sky of unbroken darkness. Only the moon lit the land, bathing everything in silver. No engines, no electricity, no glare, just the earth, the air, and a stillness as old as humanity itself. This was the heart of ancient night, a world shaped by soft shadows, gentle light, careful routines, and an understanding that darkness was not an enemy but a companion. A presence that helped people slow down, breathe deeply, and exist with a clarity we rarely experience now. As the night settled deeper into the ancient world, time itself seemed to stretch out, moving slower than it ever did under the sun. The air cooled noticeably, drifting through narrow streets, brushing against the wooden shutters of quiet homes, carrying with it the faint sense of earth, grain, and distant fires. People knew that the middle hours of the night, the long stretch between dusk and dawn, held a kind of stillness that did not exist at any other time. This was the part of night when the world felt suspended, as if it were inhaling and holding its breath. Those who remained awake during these hours often had practical reasons. Some were guards or night watchmen, following a slow patrol around the edges of a village or along the outer walls of a city. Their footsteps echoed softly on stone pathways, and the torches they carried offered narrow cones of light that pushed the darkness back just enough for them to see a few paces ahead. The torches crackled gently, sending up tiny sparks that disappeared almost instantly into the dark. These men moved with care, listening as much as watching. In the ancient world, a watchman's ears were often more important than his eyes. A distant footstep, an unusual rustling, a shift in the wind could tell him far more than the small circle of torchlight ever could. In quieter rural areas, shepherds sometimes stayed awake to protect their flocks from nighttime predators. They sat on small stools or leaned against boulders, wrapped in thick cloaks, watching their animals rest in clustered groups. The only illumination came from the moon, sometimes bright enough to cast clear shadows, other times reduced to a pale, thin line hanging above the horizon. On moonless nights, shepherds relied entirely on sound. The steady breathing of their sheep, the distant calls of owls, the occasional snap of a twig. These sounds were part of their nightly landscape, familiar signals that told them everything was normal. Quiet confidence came from understanding the night, not fearing it. Inside homes, most people slept peacefully. Their breathing blended with the soft whisper of wind slipping through tiny cracks in the walls. In wealthier homes, servants slept near the entrance to respond to any unexpected sounds. In modest homes, entire families shared a single sleeping space, their forms arranged around the darkest corner of the room. The warmth of closely gathered bodies made the cool night air more tolerable. For many, sleep came in segments rather than one uninterrupted stretch. It was common for someone to wake naturally after a few hours, sit quietly for a short while, and then return to sleep. This wakeful interlude was calm and unhurried. People used it to pray, think, or simply listen to the quiet. Meanwhile, outside city limits, travelers moved cautiously along ancient roads. They rarely traveled at night by choice, but sometimes trade schedules or unexpected delays forced them onto moonlit paths. Their footsteps sounded different on nighttime ground, softer, more deliberate. They stayed close together, keeping their torches low to avoid attracting unwanted attention from animals or thieves. The night had rules, and travelers respected them. Speak quietly, move steadily, trust the stars. Many travelers looked up frequently, tracing the familiar patterns of constellations that had guided countless generations before them. The clarity of the night sky offered a comfort that no man-made object could provide. Even with uncertainty ahead, the heavens reminded them they were part of something vast and predictable. Back within city walls, a few places remained awake. In certain neighborhoods, bakers rose in the darkest hours to prepare dough for the morning. Their small ovens glowed with warm orange light, casting soft halos that leaked into nearby alleys. The smell of rising bread drifted slowly through the streets. In larger cities, some taverns remained open late into the night, not lively, not loud, but dim and smoky, populated by a handful of merchants, travelers, or storytellers who preferred the slow pace of night to the harsh daylight negotiations of the marketplace. They spoke quietly, sometimes in low tones that blended with the crackling of a hearth fire. In these dim corners, deals were made, stories were exchanged, and friendships were quietly formed. There were also the night healers, individuals who stayed awake to watch over the sick. In rooms lit with a single lamp, someone sat beside a bed, cooling a fevered forehead with a damp cloth, listening for changes in breathing, whispering soft words of comfort. The night made such work heavier but also more intimate. With the world around them wrapped in darkness, the act of caring felt deeper, more focused. Animals, too, lived their own nocturnal lives. Dogs protected homes, alert but calm, lifting their heads only when an unfamiliar sound drifted through the air. Cats slipped silently along the edges of courtyards, hunting small creatures or simply exploring. In rural areas, the call of owls echoed intermittently, accompanied by the rustle of small animals in the grass. These sounds formed the true soundtrack of the ancient night. It wasn't silence. It was a gentle harmony of natural rhythms that people knew and trusted. As the hours passed, the darkness began to change in subtle ways. The deep black of the sky softened to a dark blue. The stars, once brilliantly sharp, dimmed slightly. The air grew cooler still, but it also began to feel lighter, as if it were preparing to shift. People who happened to be awake during this turning point sensed it with remarkable accuracy. Something in the stillness carried the promise of dawn, even before the first faint light appeared. In many households, the earliest risers began their day before the sun. Farmers, for example, often rose while the world was still dim, gathering their tools quietly to avoid disturbing others. In cities, water carriers started moving through the streets at these early hours, collecting water before crowds filled the pathways. Their footsteps echoed softly, familiar to anyone who had ever awoken early. The sound of clay jars brushing against one another signaled the beginning of a new cycle. But before the world fully returned to life, there was always a short, precious span of time, the thin line between night and dawn. Lamps burned low or had already gone out. The moon faded, shadows shifted in tone, and a pale, ghost-like hint of sunlight approached from beyond the horizon. This was the moment when night loosened its hold on the land. Slowly, gracefully, as if offering one final breath of peace before departing. People who witnessed this transition often paused to feel it. They looked toward the horizon, watching the faint glow strengthen. Birds began to stir. The first calls echoed softly from trees and rooftops. It was a gentle reminder that darkness had done its work, resting bodies, calming minds, connecting people to the natural rhythm of the world. The ancient night, in all its quiet power, was never seen as dangerous or unnatural. It was simply another half of life, a counterpart to the brightness of day. It asked people to slow down, to breathe more deeply, to move with careful intention. It shaped their routines, their fears, their joys, and their imaginations. And as dawn finally approached, pushing the last traces of darkness away, the world awakened once more, ready to begin again. As the first thin streaks of dawn stretched across the horizon, the ancient streets began to stir with a quiet kind of anticipation. Merchants lifted the wooden shutters of their stalls, revealing woven fabrics dyed with crushed minerals, baskets of figs still dripping with morning dew, and clay jars sealed with wax to protect the precious oils inside. The smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the air, carried by the faint breeze that flowed from the hills beyond the city walls. This was a civilization that lived in rhythm with the sun, where each day was a repetition of the one before. Yet each one held its own small wonders, tiny stories tucked into the corners of busy alleyways and bustling squares. The sounds of the city grew steadily as people emerged from their homes, wrapped in linen garments softened by years of wear. Children chased one another over dusty ground, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Artisans prepared their tools, heating metal, sharpening blades, smoothing clay, or mixing pigments that would later adorn temples and homes. And woven through all of this daily activity was a sense of shared purpose. A belief that every person played a role in maintaining the delicate balance of their world. Whether they knew it or not, every step they took and every choice they made contributed to the story of their civilization. But beneath this ordinary surface lay something deeper. Structures and systems that had taken centuries to develop. The great cities of the ancient world did not rise by accident. They were built on knowledge passed through generations. How to read the stars to measure time. How to shape irrigation canals so crops would flourish. How to craft laws that allowed people to live together without constant fear. Every building, every tool, every ritual was the result of countless experiments, failures, and innovations. And although we often look at ancient peoples as distant and different, their daily struggles and desires were much like ours. Safety, food, family, meaning, and a place to belong. Walking through such a city, you would see scribes hunched over tablets, their reeds pressing carefully into wet clay as they recorded harvests, trade agreements, or prayers to the gods. You would witness farmers leading animals to market, proud of the strong oxen or the healthy sheep they had raised since birth. You might glimpse a procession of priests carrying incense toward a temple, their voices low as they chanted words meant to keep misfortune far from their people. Each person believed, in their own way, that they were part of something larger. Whether that was the will of the gods, the strength of the king, or the traditions of their ancestors. And yet, even in this orderly society, uncertainties lingered. A poor harvest could change everything. Rumors of a distant war could spread fear through the city. A sudden storm could flood fields or topple the walls that protected them. Unlike our modern world, where technology cushions us from many of nature's harshest blows, ancient civilizations lived with an acute awareness of their vulnerability. They respected the forces that sustained them and feared the ones that threatened to destroy their world overnight. Still, they adapted with remarkable resilience. When rivers shifted, they moved their fields. When droughts struck, they learned new ways to store water. When neighboring kingdoms grew hostile, they fortified their cities and developed new weapons. It is easy to underestimate how intelligent and resourceful ancient people were. But their very survival proves their ingenuity. They engineered canals miles long with simple tools, calculated celestial movements with astonishing precision, and built monuments that still awe us thousands of years later. As the sun climbed higher, life in the city settled into its midday rhythm. The market grew crowded with travelers, traders, and citizens from every walk of life. Some came seeking rare spices, others came to sell livestock, and some came simply to hear news of distant lands. Storytellers stood on stone platforms, reciting tales of gods, heroes, and battles long past. Their voices rose and fell like waves, capturing the attention of anyone passing by. These stories were more than entertainment. They carried moral lessons, historical memory, and a sense of identity. Through them, each new generation learned who they were and where they came from. And as the shadows shortened, workshops filled with the steady rhythm of labor. Blacksmiths hammered hot metal until sparks burst around them like tiny stars. Potters spun wheels with practiced ease, shaping bowls and jars that would someday hold grain, oil, or wine. Carpenters measured and cut wood for furniture or for repairing homes damaged by storms. These craftspeople took pride in their work, knowing that even the simplest object, well crafted and durable, was a contribution to the life of the city. Yet behind these everyday tasks lay countless invisible systems: taxation, resource management, distribution of food, the training of soldiers, the education of scribes. A civilization could not function without these structures. Even if most citizens rarely thought about them, kings and councils made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Priests interpreted omens that guided major undertakings. And somewhere in the background, records were kept meticulously, ensuring that nothing essential was forgotten. Still, the heartbeat of the civilization was not found in the palaces or temples. It was found in the people themselves. In the woman grinding grain at dawn. In the shepherd leading his flock to pasture. In the child learning to write his name on a clay tablet. These small acts, repeated day after day, were the foundation upon which empires stood. Without them, even the grandest structures would crumble. As the afternoon wore on and the heat pressed down on the city, people sought shade beneath awnings and arches. Conversations softened, and the market's noise settled into a low hum. It was during these quieter hours that travelers might share tales from faraway places. Deserts where the sand sang underfoot. Mountains where the air was thin and cold. Seas so vast that weeks passed before land appeared again. These stories reminded citizens of how large the world truly was, and how small even a mighty kingdom might seem when compared to the endless stretches of land and sea beyond its borders. But such thoughts rarely brought fear. Instead, they inspired curiosity and ambition. Civilizations rose because people dared to explore, to trade, to build, to dream of something greater than themselves. And even though life could be harsh and unpredictable, there was always hope for a better tomorrow. Hope carried in the laughter of children, in the quiet determination of workers, and in the wisdom passed through generations. By late afternoon, the city's rhythm softened as the sun began its descent again, casting long, golden shadows across stone streets and sun-baked rooftops. Merchants began packing away their goods, wrapping delicate pottery in straw and securing baskets of fruit with ropes. The aroma of bread still lingered in the air, mixing with the earthy scent of clay and the faint tang of distant smoke from cooking fires. Children ran through alleys one last time before being called home, their voices echoing in playful bursts against the walls. Families started preparing evening meals, carefully tending to the small fires in their kitchens. Unlike the hurried pace of modern cooking, these preparations were deliberate, slow, and rhythmic. Every chop of vegetables, every stirring of a pot, every piece of bread placed into an oven was done with mindful care. As the sun dipped lower, the city seemed to hold its breath in that perfect, fleeting moment between day and night. Windows glowed faintly as lamps were lit inside homes, their flames dancing against walls and casting shadows that flickered and shifted with each breeze. The oil lamps, some hanging from hooks, others resting on clay stands, brought a sense of warmth and continuity. The lighting of these lamps was more than practical. It was ritualistic, a signal to both household and community that the day was ending, that the night was beginning, and that life must now follow a slower, gentler cadence. Outside the homes, streets emptied gradually. Travelers returned to their inns or to the protection of city gates. Animals were herded into secure pens, and the sounds of daytime labor faded into the quiet rhythm of nocturnal life. Dogs patrolled the edges of neighborhoods, alert to any unusual sound but accustomed to the familiar tones of the settling world. Cats prowled with ease, their movements almost silent, yet purposeful, as they hunted small prey or investigated quiet corners. The city had entered a state of controlled stillness, where every sound and every shadow had meaning. Even the wind seemed to change its tone, moving softly through alleyways and across open squares, brushing against the tall columns of temples, and slipping under wooden shutters to whisper against the interior walls. Inside some homes, quiet activity continued. Families gathered in small clusters near the lamps, eating their final meals of the day, or perhaps engaging in conversation about events that had occurred hours earlier. Some households practiced rituals of gratitude, offering small portions of food or wine to ancestral spirits, or whispering prayers to the gods who guided their lives. These acts, performed in intimate silence, reinforced a sense of order and belonging, creating a bridge between the end of the day and the approaching night. For those still awake outside the main city, the natural world became increasingly pronounced. Fields, hills, and rivers that had been quiet under the heat of the sun now carried their own subtle symphony. Crickets began to chirp in steady rhythm, while the occasional hoot of an owl echoed from the distance. Streams and rivers reflected the fading light in long streaks, moving slowly and quietly. Travelers or shepherds moving along these paths had to rely on all their senses. Hearing, touch, and the occasional glimmer of moonlight to navigate safely. The night was both protective and challenging, guiding those who understood its subtle cues while warning those who ignored them. By the time true night arrived, a profound calm settled over the city and countryside alike. Lamps burned low inside homes, their flickering shadows a comforting presence against the surrounding darkness. The scent of oil, resin, and cooking fires mingled with the cooler, fresher smell of the night air. People lay on mats or beds, sometimes wrapped in wool or simple blankets, adjusting their bodies to the comfort of their resting spaces. Sleep came gradually, not forced, guided by the quiet rhythms of the world. Each household, each neighborhood, each city block seemed to breathe in unison, as if the very land itself was taking a collective pause. This pause allowed for reflection, dreams, and sometimes creativity. In some households, elders whispered stories of gods and heroes to children, teaching lessons through myth and history. The tempo of these stories was slow and deliberate, words carried carefully over the low hum of nightly life. Listening became an act of meditation, a gentle bridge between waking and sleeping, consciousness and dreaming. Even in households without storytellers, the very atmosphere encouraged introspection. The absence of distraction, no devices, no loud music, no constant motion, allowed the mind to wander naturally, exploring memories, imagining futures, and resting in the flow of thought. Outside, the moon rose higher, bathing streets, fields, and rivers in a soft, silvery glow. Stars dotted the sky, clear and innumerable, forming maps and constellations that guided ancient travelers and inspired countless generations. Observing these celestial patterns was not merely an exercise in navigation. It was also an act of connection. Humanity understood its place in the vastness of the cosmos. And even in the darkest, quietest hours, there was comfort in the knowledge that the same stars watched over all. For those responsible for security or care, the night required vigilance but also patience. Guards walked slowly along city walls, attentive but unhurried, understanding the difference between genuine danger and ordinary night sounds. Healers and caretakers monitored the ill and the elderly, tending to them with gentle hands and steady voices. The night demanded respect and mindfulness. Yet it was not oppressive. Its darkness was a partner, a presence that shaped human behavior in subtle, enduring ways. By the deepest hours of night, everything settled into a balance of shadow, silence, and occasional sound. The world was at rest but still alive in countless small ways. A dog shifting in its sleep, the whisper of a passing wind, the flicker of a dying lamp. In those hours, the human spirit could relax, attune itself to nature, and find a rhythm beyond the sun. And when the first hints of dawn eventually appeared on the horizon, the cycle would begin anew, one day after another, an unbroken rhythm shaped by sun and moon, by labor and rest, by life and the gentle embrace of night itself. As the night deepened further and the moon climbed high into the sky, the rhythms of the ancient world adjusted subtly, almost imperceptibly. Inside homes, the final lamps glowed dimly, their flames small and steady, casting gentle halos of warmth around those who remained awake. Families had long since retired, leaving a quiet sense of intimacy in the darkened rooms. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of wood smoke, and the faint perfume of herbs hung to dry near windows. Those awake moved slowly, almost ceremoniously, through these spaces. A woman might adjust a jar of grain. A man might check the latch on a door. A child might roll over quietly, half asleep, murmuring into the shadows. Every motion was careful, intentional, respectful of the night's pervasive stillness. Beyond the walls, the city transformed entirely. Streets emptied, and alleyways became long ribbons of shadow. The distant call of an owl punctuated the silence, followed by the soft scuttling of small animals that had emerged under the cover of darkness. A dog stirred in a courtyard, raising its head briefly before settling back into rest. The wind carried the faintest whispers through narrow streets, rattling shutters and brushing past the edges of rooftops. People who moved through these streets, whether guards, travelers, or those with urgent business, developed an acute awareness of sound, light, and subtle motion. Their eyes and ears, attuned over a lifetime of navigating darkness, allowed them to move safely where modern individuals might stumble or become disoriented. Night in the ancient world was a master teacher of patience and observation. It forced humans to slow their pace, to focus on what mattered most. There were no distractions, no artificial entertainment, no constant bright light to draw attention elsewhere. Instead, the night offered clarity in its own way, a heightened perception of the physical world, of natural cycles, and of the self. People listened more deeply, smelled more distinctly, and even felt their surroundings with heightened sensitivity. A faint vibration in the earth beneath one's feet could indicate approaching animals. The rustle of leaves might signal the presence of wind or an unseen traveler. The scent of smoke hinted at a neighboring household or the distant remains of a cooking fire. Each sensory detail carried meaning, guiding actions and decisions. Inside homes, the night nurtured reflection. People thought quietly about the day that had passed and the day to come. They considered meals, trade, family duties, and personal responsibilities. Elders told slow, deliberate stories, which were absorbed not just as entertainment but as lessons in wisdom, ethics, and cultural memory. These stories reminded listeners of ancestral paths, divine interventions, and human resilience. They connected past to present, creating a thread of continuity that strengthened the identity of each household and, by extension, the larger community. The night, in this sense, became a sacred space for human contemplation, a pause where the immediate demands of survival softened, allowing deeper awareness to surface. Travelers and night workers experienced the night differently but with equal respect. Guards on the city walls walked slowly, torchlight scanning the perimeter in arcs, ears tuned for every unusual sound. Their steps echoed in the cool night, carefully timed to avoid unnecessary noise. Merchants returning from distant markets held lamps close, checking the sturdiness of their wagons and securing their goods against theft. Shepherds moved with quiet confidence, guiding flocks with practiced motions, their eyes tracing familiar constellations above. Even in the absence of direct sunlight, they relied on natural patterns, shadows, winds, sounds, to navigate safely. The night taught adaptability and caution, but it also offered freedom, an opportunity to move without the oppressive glare of daytime scrutiny, to experience the world in a quieter, subtler, and more contemplative way. The natural world itself thrived under this darkness. Nocturnal creatures took prominence, shaping the auditory landscape with subtle symphonies. Crickets and cicadas produced rhythmic sounds that varied with temperature and humidity. Owls and other predators moved silently, their motions precise and deliberate. Domestic animals adjusted to the absence of daylight, settling near humans for warmth and protection. Rivers and streams reflected the moonlight, creating ribbons of silver that guided movement and provided serene beauty. Trees and plants released faint scents that blended with smoke, dust, and dew, adding another sensory layer to the night's experience. Humans and nature coexisted, each attuned to the rhythms of the other. As hours passed, the night deepened into the quietest part, when almost nothing stirred except the occasional rustle or distant call. This was a time when dreams began to weave into consciousness. Children slept deeply, their breathing slow and regular. Adults sometimes entered brief periods of wakefulness, reflecting, praying, or listening. The night's darkness encouraged introspection, inviting humans to explore inner thoughts in the absence of the world's usual distractions. Even when awake, people found solace in the stillness, a comforting awareness that all living things shared this moment, resting and breathing under the same sky. The celestial canopy remained constant above. Stars twinkled in their countless patterns, offering orientation and inspiration. Constellations were more than decoration. They were guides, calendars, and sources of divine narrative. Observers traced the paths of these stars, using their positions to measure time, predict seasonal changes, or interpret omens. The sky provided a cosmic continuity that humans relied on to structure both their daily and spiritual lives. The moon, too, moved steadily across the heavens, waxing and waning, bathing the land in soft silver light that shifted subtly as hours passed. The night was a living environment, with its own pulse, shape, and influence. Even as night approached its final hours, the world remained hushed. The faint glow of embers from lamps, hearths, and fires slowly dwindled. The wind grew colder and carried the fresh, clean scent of the coming morning. Birds began to stir in distant trees, heralding the imminent return of sunlight. The ancient world held this moment with careful attention, embracing the night's lessons one final time before the sun would claim the sky once more. And when light finally returned, bathing streets, homes, and fields in gold, humans rose renewed, carrying with them the memory of a night that had shaped their thoughts, guided their senses, and nurtured their spirits. As the new day fully awakened, the city slowly adjusted to the sun's ascent. The early light revealed textures that had been hidden during the night. Cracks in stone walls, the faint grooves of worn paths, the subtle patterns of tiles on roofs. Every surface seemed to hold stories of countless generations. People emerged from their homes with measured energy, greeting one another with familiarity and warmth. Children, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, followed elders to fountains for fresh water or to courtyards where animals were being fed. The scent of bread from the previous night's baking mingled with dew on stone, creating a distinct, comforting aroma. Life continued, uninterrupted by the night that had just passed. But the memory of its calm, deliberate rhythm lingered in the movements and thoughts of those awake. Merchants reopened stalls, carefully arranging goods that had been temporarily stored. The texture and color of fabrics, the polished surfaces of pottery, the aromatic spices, all were displayed deliberately, catching the morning light to draw the eye. Farmers brought fresh produce, eggs, or milk from the surrounding fields. The city's market, which had lain quiet and near empty during the night, slowly filled with the soft murmur of conversation, the clinking of jars, and the muted shuffle of feet. Trade was conducted not with haste, but with observation and attention. Each negotiation, each exchange of goods, carried weight and meaning. reflecting a society in which both material and social balance were valued highly. Even seemingly small interactions, an exchange of smiles, a careful weighing of grain, reinforced the interconnected web of community life. Artisans resumed their craft, guided by the light and by years of ingrained skill. Blacksmiths heated iron in glowing furnaces, hammering with deliberate precision to form tools, weapons, or household items. Potters shaped clay on spinning wheels, their hands wet and steady, producing bowls, jars, and vessels destined for homes near and far. Carpenters measured, cut, and assembled, carefully ensuring that each joint would last. These crafts were not merely practical. They embodied knowledge passed down over generations. The meticulousness of each action reflected an understanding of material, time, and human need. To witness these hands at work was to glimpse the continuity of civilization itself. At the same time, scribes returned to their tablets, reeds in hand, carefully inscribing symbols into soft clay. Every mark carried information, records of trade, inventories, religious offerings, or personal messages. These documents preserved the memory of human activity, connecting past and present. In reading the careful, deliberate inscriptions, one could trace the pulse of a city. When markets opened, when harvests were collected, when rulers issued decrees, and when families celebrated or mourned. Literacy, though limited to certain classes, ensured that knowledge endured beyond individual lifetimes. It allowed societies to plan, predict, and sustain themselves across generations. The natural world surrounding the city remained ever present. Rivers glinted under the morning sun, reflecting both clouds and the activity along their banks. Birds began to sing in earnest, signaling that the world had fully returned to life. Fields, still damp with dew, showed signs of early labor. Small plows moved through soil, oxen and humans working in tandem, and the careful planting of seeds that would become future sustenance. Even in the midst of human activity, there was a constant, almost imperceptible dialogue with nature. Water, wind, sun, and soil dictated schedules and strategies. Humans adapted, observed, and responded, weaving their daily routines seamlessly into the larger environmental rhythm. Even as the city buzzed with activity, some still found moments for contemplation. The streets offered fleeting pockets of quiet, narrow alleys where children's laughter was absent, shaded courtyards where sunlight was filtered through trellises, or small temples where incense smoke rose in delicate curls. These spaces allowed a brief pause in the otherwise relentless flow of life. In these moments, people reflected on personal matters, planned for the day, or simply breathed deeply, attuning themselves to both the physical and social environment. Ancient life, though demanding, allowed for these intervals of mindfulness, often unnoticed by modern eyes accustomed to constant stimulation. Midday brought its own rhythm and intensity. Sunlight reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows and highlighting every detail of architecture and street. Labor became more strenuous under the heat, and townsfolk adjusted by seeking shade or slowing movement during the hottest hours. The city's markets remained lively, but conversation softened slightly, shifting to lighter exchanges. Negotiations paced to account for discomfort. Indoor activities, such as writing, weaving, or small-scale crafting, took precedence. Children rested, adults paused, and animals retreated to cool spaces. This mid-afternoon pause mirrored the night's slower pace in a different way. A temporal symmetry that humans recognized instinctively, allowing them to live in harmony with natural cycles. As the afternoon waned, labor resumed with renewed purpose. Farmers finished early tasks in the fields. Traders began preparing goods for evening trade. Artisans polished, repaired, and refined their creations. These activities reflected a conscious management of time, each moment assigned to a necessary task, each individual aware of the interdependency that sustained the larger society. Cooperation and observation were paramount. A single neglected action, an unwatered field, an unsecured cart, a misaligned brick, could ripple outward, affecting others in subtle yet tangible ways. Civilization depended on attentiveness, foresight, and careful coordination, lessons learned and honed over countless generations. Simultaneously, spiritual life remained intertwined with daily existence. Temples, shrines, and altars continued to function as centers of guidance and reflection. Priests performed rituals and maintained sacred fires, sometimes in preparation for evening offerings. Ordinary citizens engaged in small personal prayers or symbolic acts, acknowledging both gratitude and the hope for continued protection. Religion and belief were integrated seamlessly into the rhythm of daily life, providing both structure and meaning. In observing these practices, one could see the continuity between the individual and the community, the present and the ancestral past, the material and the spiritual. It was a comprehensive system in which each element reinforced the other. As evening approached, the transition back toward night began once more. The sun lowered, casting long, warm shadows that stretched across streets, walls, and fields. Lamps were prepared, hearth fires stoked, and the city braced itself for the slowing pace that night would demand. Families gathered for shared meals, discussing the events of the day and planning for tomorrow. Children played in the fading light until they were called home, their laughter echoing faintly against the stones. Animals were guided to pens or resting areas. The city moved toward rest without urgency, guided by a deep understanding of rhythm and pattern, a knowledge honed over countless generations. By the time the sun disappeared completely, leaving only twilight, the entire city had shifted its tempo. Lamps glowed in every home, casting soft pools of light that encouraged focus, quiet conversation, or private reflection. The scent of evening meals mingled with that of extinguished fires, wood smoke, and cooling earth. Night creatures emerged gradually, their subtle activity marking the city's transition. People who remained awake adapted their senses, listening carefully, moving slowly, and respecting the boundaries imposed by darkness. In this time, life seemed both slower and more deliberate than it had at any other point in the day. As night settled fully over the city once more, the air carried a cool, calm sensation that seemed to slow time itself. Even as the fading glow of lamps illuminated small windows, the majority of the city lay in a hushed slumber. Streets were empty, alleys quiet, and courtyards only occasionally disturbed by a shifting animal or a distant traveler. The natural world maintained its own steady rhythm. Insects chirped in precise intervals. Nocturnal creatures hunted and moved through shadows, and the gentle flow of rivers and streams reflected moonlight in long, silvery streaks. Each sound and movement was small yet meaningful, contributing to the unbroken fabric of life during these hours. Humans had long since learned to read these subtle cues, understanding the night as a guide, a teacher, and a companion. Inside the homes that remained awake, activity was deliberate and quiet. Caregivers tended to the sick or elderly, moving with precision and calm, mindful of the smallest changes in breathing, posture, or expression. Parents might rock a child or murmur soothing words to ensure deep sleep. Individuals might sit alone, observing shadows on walls or flickers of lamp flames, reflecting on past events or planning for the coming day. These private acts were not rushed. They had a weight and significance in their intentionality, linking humans to the wider rhythms of the world around them. Night demanded mindfulness, patience, and a steady awareness of everything near and far. Beyond the city walls, The rural landscape thrived in its own nocturnal life. Shepherds watched over their flocks, relying on instinct honed over years. Each rustle in the grass, every faint snap of a twig, communicated more than words could convey. The moonlight, though often dim, provided just enough guidance for movement, while stars offered orientation and a comforting constancy. Travelers who had to move at night respected these patterns, understanding that survival required observation and adaptation. Every human action was interconnected with the natural environment. To ignore it was to court risk. Night shaped the way people lived, moved, and thought in subtle yet profound ways. As hours passed, the night deepened into its most profound stillness. The city seemed to breathe collectively, exhaling the day's energy and inhaling the quiet of the darkness. Inhabitants moved through this silence with grace and careful attention. Recognizing its value, they knew that this period of calm allowed for mental and physical restoration, for reflection, and for preparation for the next day's challenges. Ancient people understood that the night was not a void or absence, but a necessary counterpart to the sunlit hours. A time to recharge, to integrate experiences, and to connect with both their community and the natural world. The celestial canopy remained vivid and precise above the city. Stars twinkled in patterns familiar to generations, forming maps, calendars, and symbols imbued with divine meaning. Observers traced their movements, interpreting changes as indicators of seasons, harvests, and rituals. The moon's steady passage provided additional structure, bathing landscapes in gentle silver light and shaping the behaviors of humans and animals alike. These celestial cycles created a sense of permanence and continuity, reminding those awake that their lives were part of a larger cosmic order. This understanding infused the night with calm authority and quiet assurance. Within this rhythm, human creativity and memory found space. Storytellers whispered tales of gods, heroes, and historical events, their voices soft and deliberate, carrying lessons through generations. Songs and poems were passed along in these intimate hours, binding communities together through shared culture and knowledge. Even when no story was being told aloud, the quiet allowed for imagination, reflection, and the weaving of thoughts into dreams. Night nurtured cognition as much as it nurtured sleep. It offered a rare form of attentiveness that daylight, with its distractions and demands, rarely permitted. Gradually, the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon. A thin line of light softened the darkness, bringing subtle changes to color, shadow, and air temperature. Birds stirred, announcing the coming sun, and insects quieted as the light grew stronger. The city remained in partial slumber, but those who were awake, farmers, traders, and early risers, sensed the shift. Movement increased subtly. Lamps were extinguished, fires prepared for morning meals, and streets began to feel alive again. This transition was seamless, the slow blending of night into day reflecting a deep, practiced harmony with natural rhythms. As sunlight finally broke over the horizon, the city came fully alive. Merchants opened stalls, children ran through streets, and artisans returned to their work. The soundscape shifted from the soft, measured tones of night to the bustling, vibrant energy of the morning. Rivers and fountains glimmered with the first light. Animals moved with renewed energy, and humans felt the familiar pulse of daytime tasks resuming. Yet, the influence of the night remained imprinted on behaviors, thoughts, and awareness. Patience, observation, and attentiveness lingered even as movement sped up. This continuity reinforced the understanding that night and day were inseparable components of life, each shaping the other, each necessary for the health and endurance of civilization. By mid-morning, the city reached a full rhythm. Traders haggled, craftsmen honed their creations, and citizens moved with purpose through streets and courtyards. Each task, whether minor or major, contributed to the collective functioning of society. Even the smallest actions, such as carrying water, tending to animals, or repairing walls, held significance. They were part of a grand, interwoven system, connecting individuals to their neighbors, to their city, and to the natural world surrounding them. Life was a careful balance of effort, observation, and cooperation, lessons encoded in both habit and tradition. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the city's energy shifted once again. Streets became busier, markets more crowded, and the sounds of commerce, conversation, and labor grew louder. Merchants displayed their goods with precision and flair, arranging colorful fabrics, fragrant spices, and polished pottery to attract buyers. Buyers moved carefully, inspecting items with attention, weighing each decision as both a practical and social act. This attention to detail was not merely transactional. It reflected a deep awareness that every choice, every exchange, influenced the broader network of community life. Children observed these interactions, learning the subtleties of negotiation, social etiquette, and practical skills that would one day become second nature to them. Artisans and craftsmen were in full motion. Blacksmiths shaped glowing metal into tools, implements, and decorative items, their rhythmic hammering echoing through workshops and courtyards. Potters spun clay wheels with precision, producing vessels that were functional, beautiful, and durable. Carpenters measured and cut wood with care, ensuring that each joint and plank would serve its intended purpose for years to come. Every action was guided by experience, inherited knowledge, and a sense of responsibility to community and tradition. The quality of work mattered not only for immediate utility but also for the reputation of the artisan, and ultimately, the stability of the society itself. Through these daily labors, individuals contributed to an enduring culture of skill, pride, and cooperation. Meanwhile, scribes continued their quiet but essential work. Their hands moved steadily over clay or parchment, recording the day's events, transactions, and observations. These records were far more than bureaucratic necessities. They were the memory of the civilization, capturing patterns of trade, agriculture, governance, and personal lives. Writing allowed knowledge to transcend the immediate moment, linking generations in an ongoing conversation. A scribe's careful inscription ensured that harvest data could be compared year to year, that agreements could be referenced, and that cultural narratives endured beyond fleeting memory. Literacy, though limited, anchored civilization itself, providing continuity, accountability, and a connection between past, present, and future. Even as human activity intensified, the natural environment remained a constant influence. Rivers sparkled under sunlight, their waters supporting irrigation, transport, and commerce. Fields stretched outward, carefully tended to ensure food for the city's inhabitants. Farmers observed the sky, the soil, and their crops, making subtle adjustments to planting and watering techniques. Animals responded to human care, but also to instinct and environmental cues, creating a network of interdependent life. Awareness of these relationships was critical. The slightest disruption, flood, drought, pestilence, could ripple across the city and beyond. Humans had learned to anticipate, adapt, and prepare, embedding resilience into every action, every routine. Spiritual life remained woven into the fabric of daily existence. Temples, shrines, and altars functioned as centers of guidance, reflection, and communal identity. Priests performed rituals in structured patterns, offering sacrifices, chanting prayers, or interpreting omens to advise rulers and citizens alike. Individuals engaged in personal acts of devotion, seeking protection, expressing gratitude, or seeking insight into challenges ahead. Religion was not merely belief. It structured life, offered continuity, and provided moral and social guidance. Even in moments of intense labor or negotiation, humans carried with them a sense of the divine, reminding them that their actions had meaning beyond the immediate and tangible. By midday, the sun reached its zenith, casting sharp, defined shadows and intensifying both light and heat. Citizens adapted their pace to these conditions. Labor slowed or shifted indoors. Animals were guided to shade or water, and merchants paused to conserve energy. The city's rhythm reflected an intimate understanding of natural cycles. Humans were neither passive nor dominant over their environment, but participants, attuned to its demands and opportunities. In this delicate balance, skill, observation, and cooperation were paramount. Every choice, when to act, how to store resources, where to build, was shaped by centuries of learned experience. As afternoon unfolded, activity resumed with renewed vigor. Trade intensified, artisans refined creations, and the city prepared for the eventual transition back to evening. Decisions made now would affect the following day. A harvest collected too late, a poorly maintained tool, or a misjudged trade could create challenges for individuals and the community alike. People navigated these tasks with care, aware that each action carried both immediate and long-term consequences. Social cohesion, economic stability, and personal survival were intertwined in this complex web of human endeavor. Evenings brought a gentle transition. The sun began its descent, and long shadows stretched across streets, rooftops, and fields. Lamps were lit in homes, fires stoked, and the city gradually slowed. Families gathered for meals, sharing news, planning tasks, and nurturing relationships. Children played briefly in the cooling light, their laughter a soft echo across courtyards and streets. Animals were guided into pens or resting areas. The city entered a reflective period, much like the night, in which attention shifted from production to connection, observation, and preparation for rest. As darkness approached, the city again embraced the rhythms of night. Lamps glowed, fires warmed homes, and the air grew cooler and calmer. Streets emptied, and nocturnal life emerged beyond the walls. The distant call of birds, the subtle rustle of small animals, and the gentle flow of water all contributed to a living, breathing environment. Humans who remained awake moved deliberately, guided by experience, instinct, and awareness. Night offered continuity and reflection, allowing people to integrate the day's experiences, observe their environment carefully, and rest in anticipation of the cycles yet to come. The sky overhead remained constant in its clarity and grandeur. Stars formed familiar constellations, guiding travelers, inspiring thought, and providing a sense of permanence. The moon's movement across the heavens structured time, subtly influencing behavior, sleep patterns, and perception. Humans observed these patterns, understanding that their lives were part of a larger order. This awareness fostered both humility and connection, reinforcing the notion that individual actions mattered within a broader cosmic framework. Even the smallest deeds, a carefully tended field, a properly maintained tool, or a measured word spoken in negotiation, were woven into this interconnected web of life and meaning. As night deepened, the city fell into its slow, deliberate rhythm. Quiet prevailed, but life continued in subtle, meaningful ways. Caregivers, guards, travelers, and artisans who remained active moved with intentionality, respecting the balance of darkness and the lessons it imposed. The world seemed at once still and alive, a duality understood intuitively by all who lived within it. Dreams began to emerge, imagination flourished, and reflection deepened. Night nurtured both body and mind, preparing individuals for the return of sunlight and the continuation of daily life. As night fully receded and the first light of dawn touched the rooftops and cobbled streets, the city awoke with a gentle, deliberate energy. The early sunlight revealed details previously hidden in shadow. The subtle texture of stone walls, the fine lines in wooden doors, and the small imperfections in pottery and textiles that had been created with care the day before. People emerged slowly from their homes, greeting one another with familiarity and warmth, their voices calm yet carrying the rhythm of morning. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes, following elders to fountains or courtyards to fetch water and feed animals. The smell of fresh dew mixed with the faint remnants of overnight cooking fires, creating a comforting, grounding aroma that signaled a new beginning. Merchants began preparing their stalls, arranging goods in precise and visually appealing ways. Colorful fabrics were folded carefully, pottery displayed with attention to symmetry, and spices were measured and set in small piles that attracted both the eye and the sense of smell. Buyers moved through these stalls, inspecting, weighing, and negotiating, each action performed with a balance of practicality and social awareness. Every transaction reflected not only an exchange of goods but also a subtle reinforcement of trust and reputation within the community. Observing this, children absorbed lessons in commerce, etiquette, and social interaction, understanding from a young age the importance of attentiveness, patience, and the consequences of action. Artisans resumed their work, guided by skill honed over years of experience. Blacksmiths shaped metal with rhythmic hammering, forging tools, weapons, and decorative objects. Potters spun their wheels, forming clay into vessels that combined functionality with aesthetic detail. Carpenters measured, cut, and joined wood with precision, aware that the structural integrity of every object depended on their careful execution. Each craftsperson's labor was more than practical. It was a tangible expression of continuity, tradition, and responsibility. Their work reflected the understanding that quality, durability, and attention to detail had both immediate utility and long-term significance for the society they served. Scribes, seated in shaded areas or quiet rooms, carefully inscribed records onto clay tablets, parchment, or other materials. These documents captured the daily life of the city, including trade, resource management, religious offerings, and personal correspondences. Writing allowed knowledge to persist beyond the moment, creating a bridge between generations. Through these records, future citizens could learn, plan, and reflect. Every inscription was deliberate, each stroke informed by a deep understanding of language, symbols, and their enduring importance. Literacy, though limited to certain members of society, provided continuity, accountability, and a sense of shared history that reinforced the collective structure of the community. Outside the city, the natural world asserted its presence with a quiet, persistent influence. Rivers reflected the growing sunlight, aiding irrigation and providing a means of transport for goods and people. Fields stretched outward, their soil tilled carefully, crops tended with precision, and livestock moved in patterns guided by both instinct and human management. Farmers read the sky, the earth, and the behavior of animals, making nuanced decisions about planting, watering, and harvesting. Animals, both domestic and wild, responded to these rhythms, creating a subtle interdependence that shaped daily life. Humans moved within this balance, adapting their actions to the natural environment and respecting its constraints, while also drawing sustenance, resources, and knowledge from it. Spiritual and ritual life remained interwoven with the routines of the day. Temples, shrines, and altars operated as centers of guidance, meditation, and social cohesion. Priests and caretakers performed rituals, maintained sacred fires, and advised citizens on matters ranging from agriculture to personal conduct. Individuals engaged in personal acts of devotion, offering thanks, seeking guidance, or reflecting quietly on their own lives. Religion was embedded in daily life, providing structure, moral grounding, and a framework for understanding human experience. Even in moments of intense labor or social interaction, these spiritual rhythms were present, informing behaviors and reinforcing the interconnectedness of the community and the divine. By mid-morning, the city reached a full, dynamic rhythm. Merchants called out their wares, artisans refined their crafts, and citizens moved with purpose through streets and open spaces. Each task, whether minor or significant, contributed to the stability and well-being of the broader society. Decisions carried both immediate and long-term consequences. How and when to water crops, the placement of a trade stall, the quality of a crafted object, or the accuracy of written records could influence the prosperity and cohesion of the community. Attention, observation, and coordination were essential, ensuring that individuals worked in concert with one another and with the surrounding environment. As the sun reached its peak, the intensity of light and heat altered the tempo of life. Citizens adapted, seeking shade, slowing activity, and conserving energy during the hottest hours. Indoor tasks, such as weaving, writing, or tool maintenance, were prioritized, while outdoor work resumed gradually as the temperature moderated. The city's inhabitants moved in harmony with the natural cycles, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of both immediate and long-term needs. This synchronization of human effort with environmental conditions reflected centuries of observation, practice, and cultural learning, reinforcing resilience and sustainability. By afternoon, the full rhythm of work and social interaction resumed. Fields were tended, trade continued, and crafts were polished or refined. Families managed their households, coordinated food preparation, and maintained social bonds. The city's soundscape shifted between bursts of activity and quieter intervals, creating a dynamic yet measured tempo. Cooperation and awareness guided every action, and the interdependence of community life became increasingly apparent. Even the simplest task, such as carrying water, repairing a roof, or moving livestock, had significance within this complex system, illustrating the subtle web of human and environmental relationships that underpinned daily life. As evening approached, the city gradually shifted toward a slower pace. The sun descended, casting long, golden shadows across streets, rooftops, and open spaces. Lamps were prepared, fires were kindled, and homes transitioned from daytime activity to reflective, family-centered routines. Meals were shared, news and observations exchanged, and relationships reinforced through conversation and attention. Children played briefly in the fading light before being guided indoors. Animals were secured and attended to, completing the day's cycles of care and maintenance. The city, though still alive, adopted a tempo that foreshadowed the calm of the approaching night. Night returned gradually, bringing with it the familiar rhythm of darkness, quiet, and observation. The city's inhabitants moved with deliberation, guided by intuition and experience. Streets emptied, lamplight glowed softly in homes, and nocturnal life emerged beyond the city walls. The natural environment, from rivers to forests, contributed its own subtle melodies and movements, shaping human perception and behavior. The night offered reflection, rest, and preparation for the next cycle, a period in which both body and mind could recover, integrate experience, and renew awareness. Overhead, the stars and moon maintained their steady courses, offering orientation, inspiration, and a sense of permanence. Observers traced constellations, interpreted celestial patterns, and understood the cycles of time that influenced both human and natural rhythms. Even the smallest human action, whether tending a field, crafting a tool, or performing a ritual, was woven into this larger cosmic order, reinforcing the sense of connection between individual, community, and universe. In this way, night nurtured thought, reflection, and imagination, while providing the essential pause needed for civilization to continue its steady, deliberate progression. As the city moved through the late afternoon into early evening, a subtle shift occurred in both light and human activity. The sun lowered toward the horizon, casting long, warm shadows that softened the hard edges of buildings, streets, and open courtyards. The golden hue of the sunlight imbued the city with a tranquil, almost sacred quality, encouraging a slower, more deliberate pace. Citizens adjusted their actions accordingly. Merchants began preparing goods for evening transactions. Artisans completed projects for the day, and families gathered to share meals and reflect upon the events that had unfolded. This daily transition was more than routine. It was a cultural rhythm deeply ingrained into every action, a learned harmony between humans and the natural cycles that governed their environment. Shops and market stalls glimmered in the shifting light, highlighting vibrant fabrics, polished pottery, and baskets of fruits and vegetables. Buyers moved with consideration, evaluating each item carefully, negotiating terms with patience and respect. Each interaction reinforced both economic and social bonds within the community, demonstrating the intricate connections between commerce, trust, and reputation. Observing these transactions, children absorbed lessons in negotiation, fairness, and social etiquette, internalizing skills that would guide them throughout life. Even seemingly mundane actions were imbued with significance, reminding all participants of their place within a broader, interconnected system. Artisans, though nearing the close of their workday, maintained meticulous attention to detail. Blacksmiths delivered the final strokes to tools and implements, their rhythmic hammering echoing softly across workshops. Potters completed vessels, smoothing edges and ensuring balance, while carpenters assembled structures with precise measurement and care. The mastery displayed in these crafts reflected generations of accumulated knowledge and tradition, each creation a testament to skill, patience, and human ingenuity. The quality of work was not simply for immediate use. It was a statement of identity, community continuity, and respect for both material and social order. Scribes continued to document events, transactions, and social matters, their movements deliberate and attentive. The records captured daily life in its entirety, preserving a memory that extended beyond the immediate moment. These inscriptions were carefully structured, reflecting an understanding of accuracy, significance, and longevity. Writing provided both continuity and accountability, ensuring that knowledge, agreements, and cultural narratives persisted across generations. Through these meticulous acts, the scribe became a guardian of civilization, linking the past to the present and shaping the understanding of the future. Outside the city walls, the natural world maintained its subtle, omnipresent influence. Fields glowed under the descending sun, rivers shimmered with reflected light, and animals moved in patterns guided by instinct and human interaction. Farmers observed crop conditions, soil moisture, and livestock behavior, making informed decisions about irrigation, harvest, and maintenance. Their attentiveness ensured the community's survival and prosperity, illustrating the delicate balance between human endeavor and environmental forces. Even minor deviations, overwatering, delayed planting, or mismanaged animals, could create ripple effects throughout the city, highlighting the importance of observation, adaptability, and learned experience. Spiritual practices intertwined seamlessly with the day's end. Temples, shrines, and household altars remained active centers of reflection, ritual, and guidance. Priests maintained fires, offered prayers, and conducted small ceremonies, providing counsel for daily challenges and longer-term plans. Individuals engaged in personal devotion, whether through prayer, meditation, or symbolic gestures, seeking insight, protection, or gratitude. Religion was not a separate sphere of life but an integral framework that shaped social norms, ethical behavior, and communal identity. Every act, from commerce to craft, was subtly informed by spiritual awareness, linking the material world to transcendent principles. As evening deepened, the city shifted into the familiar, deliberate rhythm of night. Lamps glowed in homes and along streets. Fires warmed hearths, and the natural environment responded to the fading light. Nocturnal creatures emerged beyond the city walls. Owls called across distant fields. Insects provided a rhythmic background hum, and the soft rustling of small animals created a subtle symphony of sound. Humans adapted instinctively, moving quietly, observing carefully, and interacting with both awareness and intention. Night offered a pause from the relentless pace of daytime activity, a period for reflection, restoration, and preparation for the coming day. The celestial canopy above remained vivid and precise, a constant in a world defined by cycles and change. Stars twinkled in familiar patterns, guiding travelers, inspiring thought, and structuring time. The moon's steady arc provided both illumination and a temporal anchor, influencing sleep, activity, and perception. Humans read these celestial signals with practiced understanding, recognizing the interdependence of cosmic patterns in daily life. Even the smallest actions, tending crops, crafting tools, or performing rituals, were woven into this broader framework, reinforcing a profound connection between individual effort, community cohesion, and the natural order. As the night deepened, the city's pace slowed to its most deliberate rhythm. Quiet prevailed, but life continued in subtle and meaningful ways. Caregivers attended to the sick. Guards moved along quiet streets. Travelers navigated pathways with precision, and those still awake reflected upon their experiences. Dreams began to surface. Imagination and contemplation intertwined, and the mind processed the day's events. Night, though still, was vibrant with potential, a space for learning, integration, and rejuvenation. Humans understood the value of this quiet period, respecting it with patience and care, allowing both body and mind to align with the natural cycles that sustained them. Eventually, the first signs of dawn appeared on the horizon. Soft and gradual, light brushed the rooftops and streets, revealing textures and details previously hidden in darkness. Birds stirred, rivers glimmered, and the city began its daily transition once more. Early risers emerged to prepare water, tend to animals, and ready the city for renewed activity. This cycle of day and night, repeated countless times over generations, provided rhythm, stability, and a sense of continuity that shaped human experience and civilization itself. The balance between action and reflection, labor and rest, humanity and nature, was maintained in every movement, sound, and breath. As dawn fully broke over the horizon, the city stood bathed in soft, golden light. The streets, rooftops, and courtyards shimmered with dew in the early sun, revealing textures and patterns unnoticed in the darkness of night. People emerged from their homes with a renewed sense of purpose, carrying the lessons, reflections, and energy of the previous cycle. Children laughed and ran through alleys and squares, mimicking the movements of adults, learning the rhythms and responsibilities that bound them to their community. Merchants began arranging their goods for the morning trade. Artisans prepared their tools, and scribes took up their work, capturing once more the daily pulse of civilization. Throughout the city, every action reflected an understanding of the delicate balance between effort and rest, between human ambition and the natural order. Farmers tended to fields, adjusting irrigation and inspecting crops, while animals moved according to instinct yet guided by human care. The integration of work, observation, and ritual created a seamless rhythm, a cycle that sustained life and culture alike. Even as the city became busy with the noise of commerce and labor, the lingering memory of night's quiet reflection informed every gesture, every decision, every interaction. There was a harmony, subtle but persistent, that guided the inhabitants through both challenges and triumphs. Artisans completed projects with careful attention, understanding that their work would endure beyond the immediate day. Potters' vessels, carpenters' structures, and blacksmiths' tools carried the imprint of skill, tradition, and patience. Scribes documented events with precision, preserving knowledge and insight for generations yet to come. Each citizen, in their role, whether as caregiver, trader, or laborer, contributed to the ongoing story of the city. Individual actions, no matter how small, intertwined to create a tapestry of life that was resilient, adaptive, and meaningful. Civilization itself was encoded in these rhythms, a living testament to observation, learning, and cooperation. As midday approached, the city's energy reached a full cadence. People moved with purpose, aware of their interdependence and guided by the balance of nature, social structure, and spiritual practice. Light and shadow shifted across the streets, signaling moments to pause, observe, and adjust. Even routine actions carried significance, shaping both immediate outcomes and the continuity of tradition. Through careful attention, patience, and mindfulness, the citizens sustained a way of life that was both practical and profound, blending necessity with artistry, labor with reflection, and community with individuality. Evening gradually returned, softening light and slowing motion. Families gathered, meals were shared, and conversations carried both news and wisdom from one generation to the next. The city, once again, adapted to the descent of night. Lamps were lit, fires stoked, and streets became quieter. Shadows lengthened, and nocturnal life emerged, creating a symphony of subtle sounds and movements. The rhythm of civilization continued, uninterrupted but ever aware of natural cycles. Reflection, preparation, and care defined this time, fostering resilience, mindfulness, and continuity. Finally, night deepened into a calm, deliberate stillness. The stars twinkled above in familiar constellations, and the moon's path illuminated the city in gentle silver light. Humans, animals, and the natural environment moved in harmony, each aware of the unbroken cycles that governed their existence. Observers contemplated their place within this vast web, recognizing that every action, thought, and intention was part of a greater continuum. The city rested, not in absence of life, but in quiet integration, a pause that both preserved and strengthened civilization. Dreams intertwined with reality, reflection merged with anticipation, and awareness of the day's lessons informed preparation for what was to come. In this way, the city and its inhabitants moved perpetually between light and dark, activity and rest, labor and reflection. Each day reaffirmed the lessons of the past while laying the foundation for the future. The cycle of civilization continued, resilient, deliberate, and profoundly human. And as the first hints of another dawn appeared on the horizon, the city, awake once more, embraced the eternal rhythm of life, fully aware of its place in the balance between earth, sky, and the endless passage of time.